Hey everyone, this is David Brown with the migration update for March 16th, 2023 from the Braddock Bay Hawk Watch. Today we had excellent conditions. Here's a photo from the morning. You can see there was quite a bit of early morning sunshine, but really throughout the day it went back and forth between sunny and cloudy. And when the sun was out, we had pushes of migration, and then when it clouded over, things slowed down. Winds were light to moderate from the southwest, so our best wind direction. So just with that combination of sunshine and those southwesterly winds, we had really good conditions and the first big migration day of the season. I saw this airplane heading straight for the moon, so I got my camera ready and photographed it right as it went across. Here's part of a small flock of tundra swans that was on the bay in the morning, and this was them taking off to continue their migration. Here we have an adult Cooper's hawk chasing off a juvenile Cooper's hawk. You can see that the adult has orange barring underneath, whereas the juvenile has brown streaking and is otherwise white below. And the adult took one last swipe at the juvenile and then turned back. I think there's probably a pair nesting somewhere nearby. And this gives us a good chance to take a look at the tail of Cooper's hawks. They have kind of an alternating pattern of light gray and dark blue. Snow geese were on the move today. Here we have a flock, and combining all of the flocks throughout the day, over 2,000 snow geese migrating today. Here we have a nice direct comparison between a snow goose on the left and a Canada goose on the right. And again, notice that snow geese are white with black wingtips, and they have relatively short necks. The dark goose in the middle here is what's called a blue morph snow goose. So it's the same species, snow goose, but it's just sort of their dark morph. And the adult blue morphs like this do have a white head. The young ones are more completely dark overall. And you also see some intermediate forms that have the white head and also some white on the underside. Here we have a northern flicker, which is a kind of woodpecker, but they're often seen on the ground, and they especially like to eat ants. Here we have a flyby horned lark. And there was only a few horned larks today. I thought there might be more with the favorable southerly winds. Here we have 5 wood ducks, and early in the season wood ducks are kind of hard to come by, but it seems like their numbers are starting to pick up. Here's a pair of northern pintails, and notice the long tail on the male. Here we have a rough-legged hawk, and unfortunately all the rough legs we saw today were pretty distant. A lot of the ones that were migrating were way off to our right, over right along the lake shore. And we also saw the continuing dark morph hunting the marsh, but no good looks at any of them. This was the best photo I could come up with. Here we have a juvenile Cooper's hawk, so you can see has a long tail, and the head sticks out quite a bit. It's fairly large, and it's kind of got some brown streaking on the underside rather than being that orange barring that we saw on the adult earlier. Here we have a sharp-shinned hawk high overhead, so the wings don't look as long and lanky. They look a little bit more compact, maybe a little bit curvy, a little bit of bulging in the area of the secondaries, and the head looks relatively small. And a few minutes later, we had this sharp-shinned make a really close pass to the platform, but looking at my photos, actually, it looks like this bird has the same feather damage that we saw on the one that was high overhead, so I almost wonder if that one saw us and dropped down to check out what we were doing, but this was the bird of the day as far as I'm concerned. It just made a really close pass in perfect morning light. Just a perfect example of a juvenile sharp-shinned hawk. And here's a good example of an adult Cooper's hawk. So first of all, we know it's an adult because it has the orange barring on the underside. We know it's a Cooper's hawk. It's got a long tail, so we know it's an accipiter. And look at the length of the tail feathers. We can see that the outer ones, which tuck onto the bottom, are shorter, and then they get longer as you get towards the center feathers. So on a sharp-shinned hawk, all of the tail feathers are more close to the same length. There is a little bit of variation, but it's the Cooper's hawks that you really see this difference in length. And that's where the whole thing comes from about them having more of a rounded tail tip. If you spread the tail slightly, then you see that gradation in the length of the tail feathers, and it does look more rounded. We also see that Cooper's hawks have large heads that looked capped. So it has a sort of a dark color, dark blue or even black on the top of the head. But as you get to the back of the neck, the nape area, although from this angle, you don't really see that very well, but the back of the neck is more pale. Whereas on a sharp-shinned hawk, that dark color stretches all the way from the top of the head, down the neck and onto the back. Here's kind of an interesting looking bald eagle. Not quite a full adult yet, but getting close. Here we have another older, immature bald eagle. And this one's kind of interesting because it has a lot of white on the top of the head and onto the neck. It's kind of interesting. Here we have a great black-backed gull, so sort of a large, bulky gull. We can see the pink legs and feet here. And from the underside, we really get that two-toned look to the wing, where we see a lot of dark in this area, along with the black wingtips. We also see that relatively large bill. And when we look at the top side, we can just see how dark the bird is overall. Here we have an adult red-tailed hawk, and we had a decent red-tail flight today, about 2 dozen. And we know it's a red tail because of the dark patagial bars in the shoulder area and the belly band. And we know it's an adult because of the dark trailing edge to the wing and the red tail, although in the photo the color doesn't really come out. Here we have a juvenile red-tailed hawk. So again, we see the dark patagial bars and the belly band, but it does not really have a dark trailing edge to the wing. Kind of a faint trailing edge, but not that bold trailing edge of the adults. And we see these pale inner primary feathers making sort of a translucent window. And the tail we see is not red, it's more the same color as everything else with a little bit of banding. We had 9 killdeer today, killdeer being a type of shorebird, a plover. And they're one of the main shorebirds that we see flying over. They're pretty common this time of year. We see them migrating overhead, we hear them calling first usually, and then know to look up and spot them. And killdeer are distinctive for having this double band on the upper breast. Here's another juvenile red tail. Again, dark patagial bars and belly band. Light trailing edge to the wing with these sort of translucent inner primaries and kind of a pale tail. Compare that to this adult where we also see the dark patagial bars and the belly band, but we see a dark trailing edge and a red tail on this bird. The tail's a little funky. Looks kind of sharp and pointed. I wonder if there's a little bit of tail damage to the tips of the feathers there. This is a bird that made me look carefully because I saw this really light color here, sort of around the neck area, and I wanted to double check it and make sure it wasn't a golden eagle. But we can see it's got some white on the head, and we see white in the wing pit area, so this is actually just an immature bald eagle. We had some red-shouldered hawks today, and all of the ones we were able to age were adults, which is typical. It makes sense that the adults are migrating first to get up onto the breeding grounds, whereas the juveniles can kind of take their time getting up since they're not going to nest. But the adults like this, we just see that really orange plumage overall. If we look at the wings, it's kind of a black and white striped pattern. Then the tail looks like a blackboard with thin white chalk lines. And later in the season, we'll see broad-winged hawks, which have kind of a similar tail, but instead of having those thin chalk lines, they have kind of a wider single white band, it looks like from a distance. They actually have multiple, just like the red shoulder does, but from a distance, you only see one very wide white band, whereas on the red shoulder, you see a couple narrow white bands. Another thing to look for on red-shouldered hawks are kind of squared off wingtips. And we also see a translucent crescent near the wingtip, and we see it on both sides here. And both adult and juvenile red-shouldered hawks show that trait. So if you have a red shoulder that the sun is kind of shining through it, that's something you can sometimes see from quite a distance to help distinguish it from similar species like red-tailed hawk. Here's another adult red-tailed hawk. So again, we see those dark patagial bars in the shoulder area and the belly band. And it's an adult, so it has a dark trailing edge to the wing and a red tail. Here's another adult red-shouldered hawk. And this photo, it's against an overcast sky. We can't really make out that orange as well. But if we look at the overall shape of the bird, it's a little less bulky looking than the red tail we just took a look at. So just a little bit thinner looking overall, maybe a slightly longer tail. And we can see a little bit of that translucent crescent. Now in this case, it's got the wingtips tucked back a little bit because it's in a glide posture. So when the bird is soaring and it has the wings opened up more, that's when you really see the translucent crescent. But you do see it a little bit here when it's tucked in. And we can sort of make out a little bit of the white striping on the tail here. But again, in the glide posture, the wings are tucked back, the tail's folded, so a little bit harder to see some of these ID points. And a bird like this, going high overhead when you're just looking with binoculars, a lot of times you don't really see those plumage features at all, and you end up relying more on what I described about the shape just being a little bit thinner and less bulky than a red-tailed hawk. Here's another adult red-tailed hawk, and the red tails that we're mostly seeing are the eastern subspecies, also known as borealis. So this is a very typical example of that, where you see a white throat, kind of a light to medium in terms of how heavily marked it is. It's got the patagial bars and the belly band, but it's not extremely heavily marked. It doesn't really have much streaking on the upper breast. And this time of year, we can also see the northern subspecies, or Abieticola, that is more heavily marked. Often will have a dark throat, a darker shade of the head, some red streaking on the upper breast. So we keep an eye out for those subspecies, and occasionally we'll even see a dark morph red-tailed hawk that is completely dark underneath. So that's something that's special that we keep an eye out for as well. Here's another example of a red-tailed hawk, and I'm showing a bunch of them and just trying to help you get a sense of that overall shape. Sometimes the shape can be hard to describe, but if you see it over and over again, you learn to recognize that pattern. So we see that the tail isn't extremely long like we saw on the Cooper's hawk and sharp-shinned hawk. It's more of a medium-length tail. It's just overall a very well-balanced bird, but a little bit bulky looking as well. In the morning, we had 2 sandhill cranes way off in the distance, and unfortunately never really got a good look at them. Even with the spotting scope, they were hard to even identify. But in the afternoon, we had this sandhill crane make a pretty nice low pass overhead. Here we have 2 adult bald eagles flying together, and I wonder if this isn't one of the local nesting pairs. Here we have a juvenile bald eagle, so one that was born last year. You can see it's relatively dark underneath, still a little bit of brown feathers. I think this is either feather wear or feathers that are replaced. But we see the dark head, see an even trailing edge to the wing because no feathers have been replaced yet. See these lighter tips to these couple inner primaries. That can be a good field mark for aging birds as juveniles. And we also see quite a bit of white here in the underwing, especially in this wing pit area, which is an area that you don't usually see white on golden eagles. Although interestingly, Tussey Mountain recently had a golden eagle that had some white, not really in the wing pit, it was more on the side of the bird. But it just goes to show you that for every rule, there's birds that have exceptions where, whether it's a pigment issue or just an abnormality with that one bird, sometimes birds appear that don't look like they should. So you always need to keep that in mind and rely on more than just one field mark anytime you're identifying any species of bird. Looking at the eBird list for today, I had 59 species, which I think is the highest so far this season. A couple of days up in the 50s, but 59, almost 60. Should have tried a little harder to get one more, right? And if we take a look at the HawkCount report, the migrant raptors today were 136 turkey vultures, 18 bald eagles, 6 northern harriers, 5 sharp-shinned hawks, 6 Cooper's hawks, 7 red-shouldered hawks, 23 red-tailed hawks, 3 rough-legged hawks, 1 American kestrel, and 1 merlin, for a total of 206 migrants. I had 2 new species for the season, which were sharp-shinned hawk and American kestrel. We had a lot of visitors come out today since it was really the first day that's had decent conditions. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who came out and helped spot. A lot of people, it was my first time seeing them this year, so just really nice to reconnect with all the local birders in the Rochester birding community, and hopefully we have many more days with southerly winds to come this season. Taking a look at the forecast, tomorrow looks like rain early and then cloudy with showers and windy conditions in the afternoon, high in the low 50s, winds south-southwest at 20 to 30 miles per hour. So these are good winds. It's a southerly wind, good direction. The speed is maybe a little bit on the strong side, but I think the main concern tomorrow is going to be that rain. And my weather app is showing the rain throughout the morning and then kind of trailing off in the afternoon. But we'll just have to see what the rain ends up being. If it's kind of a heavier rain, steady rain, I wouldn't expect much of a flight at all. If the rain clears out and the winds are strong like that, might get somewhat of a flight. It's kind of hard to predict, really, but sometimes if we have favorable winds, but it's a gloomy, kind of wet, rainy day, we don't really get much. But sometimes I'm surprised at the conditions that raptors will push through. So as of right now, it's looking like the morning won't be good, but there's a chance of a flight in the afternoon, but it's hard to predict. So we'll just have to see what happens. For Saturday, we're looking at a mix of clouds and sun, followed by mostly cloudy skies and gusty winds in the afternoon. High's only 36, so quite a bit colder, although the winds are west-southwest at 20 to 30 miles per hour. So there's still a little bit of a southerly component, which we would think of as being good and keeping things up against the lakeshore. Again, 20 to 30 is a little bit stronger than we would like. A little bit too strong for many species of raptors to want to migrate in, and also it makes it more difficult for the hawk watchers, trying to use binoculars and a spotting scope when you're getting bounced around. So Saturday might be some migration, but it won't. I don't think it'll be a huge day just because of those overly strong winds. But I'll certainly be out there to see whatever goes over. And for Sunday, again, looking windy. 3 days in a row of these strong winds. Cloudy skies will become partly cloudy in the afternoon. High, again, only 35. Winds west at 20 to 30. So that's a decent wind direction. It doesn't have the southerly component. And again, it's really strong. Might be some birds trying to push through. Wouldn't be surprised to see some turkey vultures moving and other things as well. But again, these are difficult conditions to hawk watch in, and I wouldn't expect a really huge day. But I'll be out there, and we'll see what we get. All right, well, I think we can officially say that the hawk watching season has begun. Today felt like a real day of hawk watching. We had a lot of snow geese on the move, decent numbers of raptors, by far the best day so far this season. And it's only looking better and better from here over the next few months as we continue the 2023 season of the Braddock Bay Hawk Watch. From Lyco Birds, this is David Brown. Thanks for watching.